Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about social value in construction, where we'll be talking about how construction firms can embed social value into their businesses to ensure better societal outcomes, but also to win new work. Not obviously to do down any of the moral objectives of social value, but obviously it's an important factor for everybody. Just to kick things off, it's a reality that government departments and local authorities now require a significant commitment to social value during the tendering process. But our panel of social value experts wants to talk about so much more than that, I think, today. So they'll be highlighting how social value can be achieved through the whole life cycle of a project, how it can be measured, how the barriers to achieving social values can be overcome, and why certain companies seem to have more success in this field than others. So I think there's plenty to talk about. So first of all, let me introduce you to our panel. We have Ben Carpenter, CEO of the Social Value International. We have Joe Dobson, Associate at Useful Projects, and Kirsty Guy, Senior Manager Major Appeals and Initiatives at the charity Barnardo's, and Richard Meyer, co-founder at the developer Stories. So welcome all of my panelists. Just to explain to the audience, the format for today, so we will go around each of the panel members. They will say a few words about themselves, about their organisations, their background in social value. Joe and Kirsty both have slides to present, so they will share those with you. Once we've gone around the panel, I will open up the debate to explore some of the themes that they've touched on and hopefully bring in some of your questions. So that's a prompt to all of you to please post your questions, and we'll do our very best to try to cover those themes. I can't promise we'll answer every single question during the time, but we will do our best to cover topics of interest. And just on a point, I know this was advertised as running for an hour and a half. Some of our panelists have got some commitments after 4, so we're going to try and wrap this up within an hour. So a little bit earlier than advertised, but I think we should have time to fit in most of what we want to talk about. So we will do our best to be swift and prompt, which is probably a good thing for everybody. Right, so enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Ben first of all, and I'm just going to remind Ben to unmute himself, and I am going to mute myself so we don't get any interference. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Chloe. I presume you can hear me now. Please nod. Fantastic. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this discussion this afternoon. It's a real honour, and I'm so pleased to see so many of you taking time out of your busy schedule. As Chloe said, I'm Ben. I'm Chief Executive of Social Value International and Social Value UK. And in my 5 minutes, I suppose I'm going to just try introduce to you our organisation, what we do, set in the context of why social value right now is so relevant, and with a few reflections and perhaps challenges for social value practitioners in the built environment. So, who we are? Well, Social Value International is a network of networks, really. It's a movement trying to standardize the way we measure and account for value around the world. Our mission statement is to change the way the world accounts for value. We believe that accounting for value only really looks at financial value. Over 400 years, financial accounting has evolved, and wherever you go in the world, we can pick up a set of financial accounts and see the financial value that organizations are creating. And that's taken time to emerge. But in the 21st century, our definition of value needs to be broadened. So it isn't just about profit that we need to look at now. Value needs to be broadened in definition. We need to look at the social and the environmental impact that businesses are making and make decisions on that basis, as well as just the financial profit. So that's our overarching mission, really, as an international organization. We're an NGO, and we do that through developing networks around the world who share that same vision, want to account for a broader definition of value, and we're trying to standardize the approach to that. So much of our work is around measurement, and I can talk a little bit about that today, because I think that is crucial if we are to be managing our social impact our social value, we need to know how to account for it and therefore make better decisions. And ultimately, we think if we do that, we can tackle the big global issues of today, which is rising inequality, the climate crisis, and well-being. Because those three things are the challenges that we face internationally: inequality, climate crisis, and issues of well-being. And I suppose that leads me on to why our movement, and I do call ourselves a movement, is so relevant today. Just look at what's happened this year in 2020 with the climate emergency and Extinction Rebellion, with Brexit, with COVID-19, with Black Lives Matter. Everywhere we look, these things are radically amplifying issues of inequality. They're bringing to the surface issues of well-being, at home, in the workplace, everywhere. We need to be aware of this. And so it's making us think about how we need to change the system and we need to make decisions in a different way. No longer as a business, as a government, or as a non-profit can we just focus on financials. We need to understand the impact we're having on people and planet. And so it's a really interesting time, and social value seems to be growing day by day. Our network in the UK and internationally is diverse in the sense that we have members from all different sectors. The private sector are increasingly interested in this now, as businesses need to win tenders, as Chloe said at the beginning, but not just about public sector procurement. Businesses now realize that responsible business is more profitable business, and creating long-term value is actually the way to succeed, which is why I'm really pleased that in my 7 years working here, the private sector has seen the biggest growth in interest in social value. But of course, public sector, governments, local governments and central governments are increasingly interested in value for money, social, environmental impact. So that makes up a big portion of the membership as well. And then social enterprises and the role of voluntary and community organizations is vital. So really, the membership is a coming together of all these different sectors, all these different types of organizations. And we often use different words to describe the same thing. Social value is the term that we're using today, but some people might be more familiar with the term social impact, or capitals, or natural capital, social capital, human capital. And what I think is important is that we continue to have these cross-sectoral discussions so that we do realize that we might be using different words, but we're talking about the same thing. And what we're actually talking about, whether we use the word social value or social impact or social capital, is changes in people's lives and their well-being. Because ultimately we want to tackle inequality and improve the well-being of people. So it doesn't really matter, I don't think, if you call it social value or social impact. We need to find out what's important to people and how we can improve their lives. Just to use really simple language, that's what this is about. It's about creating a dialogue with people, creating mechanisms between organizations and the people whose lives are affected so that we can understand how their lives change in a good way, but also in a negative way. So social value is about positive changes, but also negative changes. And we believe that organizations should account for all of that, the intended changes, the unintended changes, and understand how our activities as organizations are impacting on people's lives and their well-being. And if we can create that dialogue and that accountability between organizations and people, that will put us in a better situation to build trust, create long-term value, and be more accountable to those whose lives we are affecting. So just finally then, before I hand over to the other panelists, some reflections on social value in the built environment. Well, I have to say I'm really excited because the built environment is the one industry sector that is really embracing the social value movement. Everywhere I look across the built environment, whether it's planning, development, supply chains, there's so much happening, and I'm really pleased because that's all good things. There's also a long way to go. I think there's a lot of practice in the built environment which talks about social value, but could do more. Whether we say, well, social value equals an apprenticeship or social value equals a job, My challenge is maybe it might do, but can we do more? Can we do more in the built environment to address these inequalities across society? Just by creating an apprenticeship, does that mean that we've improved well-being or tackled inequality? Probably not. So we all probably need to challenge ourselves in this, interesting times to see how much further can we go if we do really want to tackle inequality and well-being. When we say social value is a job, is that job a good job? Is the apprenticeship a good apprenticeship? Are we actually changing people's lives? And do we have the mechanisms in place to account for that and improve if we're not? So I suppose those are my provocative statements that perhaps might tease out some thoughts from the other panelists, or hopefully you as the audience. So I'll pause there and hand over back to you, Chloe.
Thanks, Ben. That's a great overview. We will unpack a lot of that, I'm sure, in our wider discussion, but just as an initial question to you, obviously you said you've been at the organisation for about 7 years. Over that time, would you say you've seen quite a lot of progress? I mean, how, I know we're talking about there's a long way to go, but just to give some context of where we've come from, how much progress have we made in terms of just measurement, standardization, or even just talking about the issues?
Yeah, good question, happily. So 2013, it was still a very niche subject when I joined the organisation. Social return on investment, social impact. It was largely in the third sector. So you had social enterprises who were used to talking around social impact and demonstrating impact, largely for funding applications. But I think it's fair to say things have snowballed, and the Social Value Act in this country, in the UK, has had a huge impact in growing the agenda. It's become a movement. We've got more and more big businesses, as I said, sort of interested in it. The practice is evolving, and there's some really good stuff, but there's also a lot of not so good stuff. So I'm kind of cautious. I think we're at a bit of a crossroads. I think we need to go further. And one of the things that I'm keen to see more of is scrutiny of social value claims and reports to actually say, well, is social value being created? Because at the moment, whilst we have legislation that encourages people to talk about social value, the language there is still pretty weak. It's, have you considered social value? Which consider social value is quite a sort of weak suggestion. It's not, have you accounted for social value? So we can definitely go a lot further. But what I would say though is, we bring people together in big conferences regularly, annual conferences in the UK, national ones and international ones. In 2018, we were really talking about it as a movement, which was great. In 2019, we had a conference where we called it Going Mainstream, and that was an event that we held in Taiwan, which had 700 people that had travelled from across the world to talk about social value. And the people in that room were coming from mainstream finance, government, central government, and social enterprise networks from around the world. It really felt like the agenda had gone mainstream. Another example is that Social Value International is now working with institutions like the OECD on policy internationally, the United Nations Development Programme on how to sort of standardize measurements against the SDGs, and the Impact Management Project, which is a project we're part of, is really coming out of the investment world, because mainstream investment is changing. One thing I forgot to sort of mention is the changes in pensions, for example, is significant and actually relevant to this conversation. How many headlines have you seen around pension funds deciding to disinvest in fossil fuels? Well, maybe you're not as sad as me and actually get interested in headlines on pensions, but to me, this is actually an exciting movement. It's a sign that mainstream capital markets are changing their decisions. No longer can people sign up to a pension and just not care where the money's going. A new generation of people with wealth are investing, care about more than just profit. And there's lots of research out there to show this. A transfer of wealth in the next few years from an older generation to a younger generation who actually care more about the planet and people means that the sort of conversations I'm having now are entering, you know, very different spheres. I'm talking to institutional investors, pension funds, and that certainly wasn't happening 5-6 years ago.
Oh, that's really interesting, Ben. I'm sure Richard, as a sort of developer as well, will want to touch on that sort of investment side of things as well. Right now, I'm going to go over to Jo. I just have to make Jo a presenter so that she can share her presentation. So here we go. Jo, you should be able to share your screen in a second, and I will give you the nod when I can see it.
Okay.
Yep, that's looking good. Okay, over to you, Jo.
Let's put this on slideshow. Okay, fantastic. So thank you very much, Chloe. So I'm Jo Dobson. I'm an associate at Useful Projects, and I've been working in sustainability in the built environment for about 13 years now, and really focused on social value in more recent times. And today I'm going to give you a really quick overview of the key findings and recommendations from a piece of research that we've done fairly recently. It was published at the end of June, and it looks specifically at the infrastructure sector, but the findings are relevant to the construction sector as a whole. And the research project was co-funded by the Institution of Civil Engineers and Useful Projects. And if you're not familiar with those organisations, the IC, the Institution of Civil Engineers, is the professional body for civil engineering. It really represents the infrastructure sector, and it's got more than 95,000 members internationally. And Useful Projects is a sustainability consultancy and a social enterprise. And our mission is to transform the built environment. And we have a particular focus on social value, carbon neutrality and circular economy. And I work with organisations and projects to create social value at all stages of the project lifecycle. The need for this project stemmed from the ICE Sustainability Leadership Panel, and they really believe that infrastructure projects can and should be delivering many more benefits to communities across the UK. But there was a feeling that there was an implementation gap between lots of organisations setting policy objectives around this and actually what's being delivered on the ground. And so this research really set out to investigate that implementation gap, get a feeling of what current practice looks like and what the barriers are, and then produce some really practical recommendations. And with hundreds of billions of pounds of money earmarked for investment in the construction sector over the next 5-10 years, got a really fantastic opportunity to make sure that that investment addresses some really crucial socio-economic issues and of course delivers the UK's net zero carbon ambition. There are 8 key findings in the report. I'm going to highlight just a few of these here today, and I will provide a link to the report at the end of the presentation if you are hoping to find out a little bit more. So one of the first key findings was that clients and contractors need to be much more ambitious and creative in their social value approaches. So in terms of ambition, having a social value strategy and really clearly defined outcomes is incredibly important to guide the direction of the whole project and embed it from the outset. And I think we need to move beyond the usual employment, apprenticeship and SME targets, which of course they are incredibly important, particularly now. But there is more that can be done, particularly to help the most vulnerable people in society. And as Ben said, really sort of change people's lives. I'd say basing interventions on a local needs analysis and the desired outcomes of the project, and not just picking from a standard menu of items, came out as being a really a vital step forward. So can you create partnerships with local charities who really understand the needs in the area, or procure from social enterprises? And the image here is of Thames Tideway, who are featured as a case study in the research. They've got a really fantastic range of social value interventions spanning employing people with convictions, to creating partnerships with a youth engagement charity to get young people from minority backgrounds into rowing on the Thames, and collecting probably over 100,000 plastic bottles from the river as well. The key barriers that came out are shown here on the screen, and I'm sure that these will feel very familiar to lots of people in the audience. Lack of consistent definition and measurement came out as one of the top things that is really inhibiting progress. I'm actually part of the UK Green Building Council's Social Value Task Group, who is working to develop a definition for the built environment, and that will be, in the next few months, that will be published and should really help the whole construction sector all speak the same language and know what we're all aiming for. Lack of knowledge and skills on how to embed social value across all stages of the project life cycle, and then absence of leadership and ownership at the corporate and project level. I think it was only 41% of respondents said that board level responsibility for social value had been defined, so I think that's definitely an area for improvement. Now, the key elements in the report is this. So at the moment, the focus of social value is mainly during procurement and construction phases, and we know that's largely because procurement is the focus of the Social Value Act. But the research highlighted that there are implementation gaps at each stage of the project life cycle where social value can be created. And I'm just going to pick out a few of those to discuss now. So there is a huge opportunity around the design stage, which is really being missed. And designing construction projects so that they generate additional social value can really transform the fabric of local communities for generations to come. They can enhance local economies and provide a really wide range of benefits. Plus, it can help gain public support and enhance the long-term value of the asset. But it's an often overlooked area. And actually, in the survey that we did as part of the research, the majority of people said that social value is included in design briefs poorly, and that there has been very little focus on the role of designers to date. So again, another big area for improvement, as well as a shift from just doing community consultation to actually co-designing with the community, really finding out what they need and building that into the design. And this is an example of co-design that my organisation did on the Olympic Park a long time ago now. And then on to construction. So poor contract management was often cited as an issue when it comes to construction and actually delivering these commitments. So the supply chain will often make commitments during tender stage, and either they don't make it into the contract or there aren't sufficient resources to ensure that those commitments are delivered. And I would say that high profile projects are definitely an exception here. But yes, another area for improvement, getting that strong contract management and making sure that we are actually implementing these commitments in practice. This image is of a really great ex-offender program called Bounce Back, which again, a lot of organisations use. And finally, we mustn't forget about end of life and the social value that can be created during decommissioning or deconstruction of assets. So Sellafield Nuclear Power Station has developed a really strong social value strategy that's worth a look. In the report, you will find 3 sets of recommendations. There are strategic recommendations for industry as a whole, and that covers things such as investing in the right project and really building in that social value right from the outset, focusing on outcomes and local needs. And then there are a set of recommendations, recommendation B, which is all about closing the implementation gap through the life cycle. And then finally, there are a set of recommendations for institutions and government, which are much more about upskilling and getting this consistency of definition. So my call to action, I would say, is about embedding social value across the whole life cycle. That was one of the key messages in the report, and I would love to see a shift in that. I've provided a link to the report on the screen there, and my contact details if you'd like to have a discussion about any of that more. I always love to talk about this. So yes, that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing that now, Chloe.
Thank you very much, Jo. That's great. Really good overview. Rather than ask you a follow-up question now, but I do have lots, but I think I might go over to Kirsty for her presentation, just so that we make sure we keep good time. So Kirsty, I'm just trying to make you a presenter, and then hopefully you can share your screen. And I'll give you the nod when I can see it. Yes, I can see it there. Over to you, Kirsty. You might just have to unmute yourself.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to talk to you all. Slightly different perspective from me, I think. I've worked as a fundraiser for Barnardo's for almost 18 years, currently working to develop major funding appeals and initiatives, one of which is very firmly around social value. Just to add in, I've seen a huge shift in the way that Barnardo's supports children and young people since I started 18 years ago. We are very much today about giving young people and children the skills to manage their own lives in the future as they go forward, rather than just giving them a treat and giving them a nice time, which is sometimes the way it was 18 years ago. So for me, that's a significant shift that I've seen over the years. For those of you who perhaps not currently familiar with what Barnardo's does, we have 1,000 services in the UK. We work with almost 300,000 children and young people every year, with some of the most challenging needs that there are in the country. So children and young people affected by issues such as child sexual abuse, mental health and wellbeing issues, challenges with employment and training, dealing with being a young carer, where you're a child who is caring for an adult, domestic abuse, disability, and children who are leaving the care system, which is the focus of what I want to talk about today. We're also currently seeing a huge impact of the recent pandemic and the impact that COVID is going to have on the already vulnerable children and young people, and how that's going to play out over the coming months is going to be extremely challenging for them, and we need to be there to support them. So currently my focus is on the Positive Futures appeal. Positive Futures is all about how we support children and young people who are leaving the care system. Many care leavers experience real poverty of hope, with very little aspiration for their futures, getting a good job. I think the statistics that you can see on the screen speak for themselves. To give them the opportunities to succeed in life and feel like they have any worth in society is hugely important. And for me, it's unimaginable when, as a parent, I have young adult children, and knowing how much support they have and their ambition and their hopes and dreams, to know that there are young people who just don't have those hopes and dreams, I find really difficult to reconcile. Clearly this situation can be horrific for care leavers, but it has a big impact on society as well, as they can make little contribution to their local communities, to the economy, and they're so reliant on the system to support them. So our Positive Futures appeal is designed to make a change for these young people. There are three main strands to that. We're focusing on helping young people into employment training and the right skills to do so, raising awareness and extending our existing provision of people to be there to support young people leaving care. But the area to talk about today is actually talking about the benefits of providing stable, affordable housing with the right support in place to help the young people through this time of their lives. Care leavers often don't have the same stability as other children do when they're growing up. The care of loving, supportive family is instrumental in developing resilience, confidence and self-esteem. And without this, they really struggle with their mental health and well-being. Looked after children are actually 3 times more likely to have a diagnosed mental health issue than other groups. So our ideal is that we have these 3 elements that all come together, the triangle of fire, to make sure we give young people the best chance in life. The capital build project that I want to talk to you about today is Gap Homes. Barnardo's Gap Homes addresses belonging in transforming the path to adulthood and independence for care experienced young people. The concept is based on working in partnership with local authorities or landowners to gift us small building plots, working in partnership with the construction industry to create good quality, easy to maintain, easy to heat homes, and where Barnardo's can be effectively the landlord and allow some flexibility around tenancy. It's really important to Barnardo's that the voice of young people is at the heart of everything that we do. So we've actually involved care experienced young people in the development of Gap Homes from day day one, adding their voice to what is important to them about the design and layout of the houses that we're creating, as well as designing the support packages for the young people who are going to be living in the gap homes. The idea originally came from one of my colleagues who has been supporting young people into tenancies for very many years. She was truly appalled at the type of accommodation that was deemed suitable for them. As we've already said, they often faced with inadequate accommodation and robs them of hope. We know that unsuitable housing undermines young people's progress and reduces the impact of support, any other support that's provided. And each time a placement fails, there's a personal cost to the young person and significant financial and resource costs to the associated local authority as well. Over time, the experience that my colleague had led to a real light bulb what if moment, and the seed for gap homes was born. Saint-Gobain have been a partner in the development of gap homes since the very early stages of the project. It's touched on many aspects, including the design, materials and solutions provided. In addition, Saint-Gobain have also been very active in fundraising the capital for the first 2 homes that we've built, and they've extended their partnerships with Barnardo since. There are huge benefits to us for the partnership, many of which will continue to be realised over many years ahead, and we hope that beyond the charity partnership will be continuation of the work around gap homes. Just a couple of examples of the things that they've been able to help with in providing in the homes. We've included the Saint-Gobain's multi-comfort solutions into the building, which makes the performance much better alongside the well-being of the occupants at the same time. And it's also enabled a fabric-first approach, which has improved the thermal performance whilst reducing running and ongoing maintenance cost. And I'm sure you can see the benefit that that will have for young people moving forward when the house is easy to maintain and easy to heat. The end result is a self-contained, purpose-built house owned by Barnardo's, which is available to a care leaver for up to 2 years. Whilst they're living there, they're supported by our Barnardo's team, who help them to learn to live independently, providing them with someone to be there and becoming a vital family network that they need, and supporting them into their education and employment. The first 2 homes were completed in the early part of January this year, and I'm delighted to tell you we now have 2 young care leavers who are living in their homes, and incredibly challenging times through lockdown. They have needed a lot of additional support over and above what was anticipated, but I think that's fair to say for an awful lot of young people. Been very difficult for them, but I'm happy to report they have now both enrolled in college and they're starting their journey towards employment and independence within their local community. As we roll out across the UK, we're now looking at a variety of different models, one of which you can see as an example on the screen, and we are in discussions to have additional gap home sites starting in Glasgow, Fife, Stirling, Epping and Norfolk currently, but we all know that we have many other local authorities who are keen to talk to us about having gap homes and the wraparound support in place for young people in different communities around the whole of the UK. Our ambition is that we can build 50 homes in 5 years. We obviously want to do an awful lot more than that, but that's our starting point for what we want to have. I hope what I've talked about there just shows you that how Barnardo's is wanting to innovate change in local communities for young people leaving the care system. There is clearly a very significant cost to society if the issues are addressed for young people. For example, the cost of unemployment, housing, health issues, drug and substance misuse issues, crime. They're more likely to make inappropriate relationships, they're more likely to be young parents and then see their babies at risk of also being taken into care, which just perpetuates the cycle. We want to break that cycle and we want to enable these young people to be an asset to society and part of the local communities. So alongside saving those costs to society, we also want to enable the young people to really be part of developing a pipeline of talent that will contribute in the best ways possible. The positive legacy from this work, I think, is just going to be incredible. I hope some of you are thinking, what can we do? If so, we'd love to talk to you about it, and my final screen has my contact details on, so have a look at that. We are always in need of funds to support things like the funding of the wraparound support for young people that we need. We also need to be able to access into the very small building plots that local authorities often have that are lying dormant, or even developers have sitting not doing anything. And we need more partners to work with us in the construction of houses. Working in partnership with Barnardo's is very much a two-way process. Companies can use partnerships to help us engage with their staff and networks, pulling together to make a real difference. We also know that many of you in the audience today are some of the best professionals and experts who could support us with our capital builds. And we are the experts in supporting children and young people, but we're not the experts in building houses. So if anyone is interested in helping us with project management, external works, interior fit, we'd love to talk to you. If we pay up front for the houses that I've already just mentioned to you, and we also have another unit in London planning to create a 9-bedded accommodation centre, we will need to raise £6 million to do that. But we hope that with the support of people within the industry and your supply chains, we might be able to think differently about how we can provide some of the accommodation to meet the needs of the young people. That's a very whistle-stop tour of everything that we're doing. I hope you can see the benefit in how the social value from the construction is going to have an impact on young people's lives. And I just want to end on a sentence that somebody gave me, actually. In the years to come, many young people will benefit from each home that is built. Every home will build a lifetime worth of impact for each young person that lives there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kirsty. That was brilliant. I think I'm going to move swiftly on to Richard, who I think has got some examples of similar, well, not similar projects, but projects that are also trying to do some good. So over to you, Richard.
Thank you. Thanks, Chloe, for inviting me to join this afternoon. So my background is I'm a property developer. Property developers aren't normally associated with social value creation. Sometimes they don't have the best reputation. But hopefully what you'll hear about this afternoon gives you some hope. So my background is that I spent 15 years at Argent, where I worked on the regeneration of King's Cross. But a couple of years ago, I co-founded a new property development company called Stories. Myself and my two colleagues founded it because we really wanted to set about creating an organisation that would help people get on better in life, in simple terms, sort of linking back to what Ben was talking about earlier. So more specifically, what are we? We are you could say we are a sort of social and environmental outcome focused property developer, and that what we seek to do is to partner and work with people, particularly landowners and investors, and also then the professional team and the constructors who share some of the values that we have as well. The basic model is to really say, how can we identify an opportunity where there is an ability to improve the outcomes, social and environmentally, for people, and how can we use development as a tool to facilitate those outcomes happening, as opposed to let's go do a deal, let's go build this building, and then we're going to have a wrapper of outcomes around it that we kind of want to do. We're kind of good people, but we're really doing it to tick boxes, maybe to facilitate planning, getting through planning and stuff like that, to ensure the community's happy. But really for us, it's looking at the other way around. It's just like a slightly different lens, slightly different perspective on things, focusing on the outcomes, using development as a tool to help make that happen. It's been a very interesting experience over the last couple of years. Perhaps to give you a little example of it on our most advanced project at the moment, about what that translates into, we're working with a homeless charity called St Mungo's in Westminster, and we won a project with them in competition, which is basically to go and create an amazing new facility for them in terms of accommodation for their clients, and improving outcomes for them, both in terms of the sort of physical environment they're in, and also the management and services and welfare that they can receive because of that physical environment as well. So, you know, for us, that's, you know, number one outcome, you know, by working with them. Of course, to do that, you've got to pay for the development. So number two is we've got to, you know, we're going to build some homes in Westminster. And so for us, we're trying to maximise the amount of affordable housing that we have with that. And we're trying to exceed policy if we can. So for us, that's our second you know, big kind of outcome that we're looking to have. We're trying to outperform on the environmental perspective as a side as well, because I think those two do go hand in hand. And then in turn, there will be further benefits in terms of, you know, for the local community as well, which will come through really identifying the local need, which we're in the process of doing at the moment. I think the thing that's been really interesting for us is, you know, going back to, I think one of the questions that was posed to Ben earlier, is that the you know, there is an ever increasing interest and demand from both landowners and investors in this space, and that, you know, we're pleased to be able to participate in that. And actually, on a point that Joe made around procurement, of course, and the Social Value Act and how that applies, you know, encouraging public sector bodies and things like that, or requiring them to sort of take social value a bit more into account when they're weighing things up. Of course, that applies also to even, you know, a local authority landowner actually putting some land into the market for property development. And so it's very interesting actually to see, you know, where does it get baked in? Where does social value get baked in? And actually, it goes right up the food chain, often actually to the landowners and the investors and the money, because actually, if it's not baked in at that stage, it's actually very difficult sometimes for then further, you know, the developer or the constructor or whatever to really maximise and do their bit too. So it's a real challenge actually to make sure that you know, it's baked in early on. I mean, I think that the other thought I'd sort of quite keen for people to think about is or something that plays on my mind is, you know, how do we make sure that we are actually genuinely creating some social value? And that, you know, there's a lot of talk. It's a big buzzword. We all talk about it. There's a lot of stuff in the press about it, and you know, I hate to say that to some degree, sometimes it might be a bit wallpaper, you know, and whereas other people are making some really genuine efforts to move things forward. And so I would sort of challenge each of ourselves and you know, people listening in today is, you know, if we're interested in that, how in your own organisations does one actually bake in, you know, ensuring these better outcomes from a sort of, you know, from a social perspective. You know, one example that we've done is that we have we're a B Corp, and you know, I can answer questions about that later if you want to know what it is. But it's about us actually, as an organisational or a corporate level, baking in some of our commitments as well to effectively triple bottom line, you know, outcomes. So the environmental, social, and economic, and sort of weighing them all up together. So you know, that's key. But also, there's other things you have to say about being really, you know, really transparent, and also in terms of when you're getting involved in a project, thinking about the projects you're working on, you know, really taking the time to sort of establish, you know, and understand what the local need is. Because again, it can be a problem, unfortunately, that you can get led by box ticking again, of like, it's all about the number of jobs that are created and that's it. You know, it's all about the number of skills that are created. And those are all good and valuable things. And you need that to just move the game forward a bit. But I would encourage, again, people to be innovative and actually be looking locally at the particular issues that concern them, and try to be a little bit more innovative to bring other outcomes into the fore as well. So those are a couple of my thoughts, I suppose, to give to listeners today. But I'll wrap up there, so there's a bit of time for a bit more debate as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Richard. Well, look, we've had loads of questions in. It's probably going to be hard to answer them all, but if I kind of theme them, but just because Richard's just finished off there, and being a developer, maybe you're best to answer this one. One listener's just asking about actually, you know, she's from an architecture perspective, and she often comes up against developers trying to make a business case for social value when all they're focused on is the financials. How do you have those discussions with organisations that just don't seem to understand social value, or is it not worth having conversations with those people?
Well, yeah, no, I think that's a very, very good question, a very good challenge, and sadly, I mean, I definitely think there are a number of, you know, very enlightened developers who are doing good things. Sometimes we have to recognise that their own constraints and their own governance process and their shareholders and even think all those things, they all will affect their ability to actually do as much as they'd like to sometimes. in other instances, there may just be a culture that pervades that it is, yeah, it's about the deal, or it's about the financial returns and stuff like that. And so probably my one thought is to a degree, one, you can promote, obviously one can put forward an argument that says, well, if we do these things, it might either increase our opportunity to win this or do whatever. So you can obviously put forward a case around that. But there is a little bit of me as well, which sort of says, well, you kind of got to vote with your feet as well. You've got to work with the people that actually you think you've got an alignment of interest and you actually genuinely share your passion. And if ultimately, people see over the other side of the table, other parties, actually creating some great outcomes, winning work, doing good stuff, then, to a degree, they might go, okay, I'm missing a trick here. And maybe even if it's not my number one priority, maybe I do need to think about it a bit more as well. So sometimes that, you make an effort, but if not, you just kind of got to move on and you've got to go align yourself with others who shared values. Alignment is critical. Alignment is critical. Deep down alignment is critical for the best outcomes here between all the parties. And that's what we should all be sort of shooting for.
Yeah. Just a question, I guess, to the whole panel. Anyone can pitch in on this one. So one listener's asked about this attempt to try to monetize social value, to put a financial value on social value. Is that a help or a hindrance? Do we need to do that to be able to be taken seriously, or do we need to try to convince others that they've got to think broader? Ben, maybe you could kick off on that.
Yeah, happy to. I was smiling as that question came up because it's a really good question, and it's one that we deal with all the time. And I think it's fair to say it is a double-edged sword. It's both an advantage and a disadvantage because what financial proxies do, or monetization of social outcomes, is put it into a language that we can understand. So that's its advantage. It's a good way of communicating value because how else do you express value? And language and money is perhaps the best way that we have of doing that. But of course, money and value is not the same thing. So there's a trap there, isn't there, that we suddenly start thinking that as long as there's a pound sign, that's the price of something. So we've got to be really careful when we see a pound sign and we say, well, is that the cost? Is that the price? Or are we just using that as a representation of value? So to get a little bit technical in terms of measurement, we've softened our principle on valuation so that if people don't want to use money to express value, that's absolutely fine. They can use weighting, non-monetary valuation, and there's lots of techniques out there to establish, because you've got to ask yourself, why do we need to value anything? Well, we need to value things to understand what's most important and how to create more value. So you can do that using non-monetary methods. You can just say, right, there's this social outcome here, there's this social outcome there, and this one is more important than that one. And we can say this one is 3 times more important than that one. And actually, that's often good enough to make decisions. And actually, we're making those decisions all the time. We're doing it with our gut. We're doing it with our instinct. We know that creating a home for young people is a valuable and important thing. We know that that might be more important than planting a tree, I'm not saying. And people are making these decisions all the time. But they're applying their own values and their own subjective relative importance to these things. One local authority might say, for us, it's more important to create homes for vulnerable children than it is to plant trees. And that may well be right, the right decision, but they're applying a value-based judgment to that decision. So all we're trying to do is make that a little bit more transparent, because let's be clear about which things are more and more important to local communities, to different stakeholders. Let's try and express that relative importance, compare options. Money is just the best way to represent that relative value. It's not perfect and never will be. And I think that's what we need to get over, that even if you had all the universities trying to sort of get scientific ways of capturing that value in monetary terms, it wouldn't be possible. But what we can do is move to a position where the decisions we make are more transparent and they're more informed by data. And the more that understanding of value is informed by people who experience it, the more reliable those decisions are. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely. I think we've definitely had quite a lot of questions about a sense of frustration of there not being a sort of standardized approach, not differences between local authorities, not knowing how you win work on the basis of social value. And then we've had one question in about, would it help if actually the weighting that was applied to social value, it's relatively small, in terms of public sector weighting. Should there be some sort of way that we mandate to increase that weighting, and that you have to drive social value through the clients, and that clients are key here, whether public sector or private? Jo, I don't know if you've got a view on that.
Yes, absolutely. So the weighting came out as a really sort of key finding in the research as well. And most people said that there should be at least 10% weighting to social value and at least 10% to the kind of environmental sustainability side of things. But hand in hand with the weighting, it's really important that the people who are setting the questions are setting the right kind of questions, and that they're being evaluated by the right people. And then again, it gets into the contract and are actually sort of implemented in practice. So it's not just people saying wonderful things to win the work, that they are actually taken forward. And I think there is a great deal of improvement that is needed in the way that questions are asked to focus on outcomes rather than X number of apprenticeships. It's about how those apprenticeships can then lead into jobs and careers and such like. So yes, huge area for improvement from my perspective on that.
Okay, and so we are getting quite a few questions about people asking, well, they are interested in having more of a proactive approach to social value. They feel like they're doing a lot of the right things, but actually, how do they improve, whether you're a contractor or on the consultant side? And I know, Richard, you were talking about, how do you differentiate when you're working with contractors and consultants? Clearly, you want to work with people who it's not just wallpaper, they genuinely have got this embedded. So what are you looking for when you're looking for partners, looking for like-minded organizations? What kind of commitment do you feel is a bit of an indicator that they're serious about it?
Yeah, so for me, it's around a kind of corporate level commitment to these things. So, for example, with a constructor or a contractor, it will very often be the case that there are kind of, again, necessary things that are done at a corporate level in terms of satisfying, CSR requirements and things like that. But then really, particular jobs and skills and all those sorts of narrower definition of social value stuff is then coming through just on a project level. And what I'm really interested in, for example, is where the actual senior management team is genuinely interested in actually what they can do in the areas of both social and environmental outcomes and improvement around those, and has actually made a corporate commitment that they properly resource to try to support that as well. So for me, that's critical. For us as an organisation, one way in which we've tried to, because we're a new organisation, we've tried to give another sort of, you could say, line of confidence or a badge, because people like badges, to investors and landowners that we're talking to as well. Is that we have this B Corp pending status, which is effectively where you've changed your articles of association at a corporate level to meet triple bottom line returns. But then apart from doing that and putting it in your filing cabinet and shutting the drawer, you actually then are to be you have to actually annually report on your progress. And actually, it's quite interesting at a corporate level, if nothing else, it sets out a very useful framework for how what sort of areas you should be focusing upon. And this is not something which is specific to the built environment. This is, you've got Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream does this, and various other organizations as well. So that's just one route that we've taken. I mean, I think that the other thought, and just coming back slightly earlier to the other question as well, around the measurement of this as well, and how you articulate that. At the end of the day, for me, you have to take both a quantitative and a qualitative approach. So it may be it's money, or it may be it's another way of just measuring other outcomes about participation of people in something, for example. But also you need the qualitative side as well. That's part of the reason why our business is all about stories, because it's about the stories that people tell because they've got on better in life. It's not about the amount of money we've made. And so you know, capturing that and then playing that back to people, whether it's other stakeholders, whether it's the local authority, investors, whatever, is as equally important as the sort of numerical count side of things, because we know, you know, fundamentally as animals, humans, whatever, that one of our key underpinning thing that we rely upon is stories, and is the power of stories, and you know, and so on. And it's not just numbers and growth and capitalism, stuff. Is actually, you know, actually learning and hearing about interesting things that, you know, and it unites us in things, you know. So the qualitative is equally important as the quantitative aspect as well.
Absolutely. In fact, that I think you've answered a couple of questions in the process of that answer, where people were asking about how do you capture and how do you record progress, how do you monitor progress to make sure that you are having an impact. So I think you have touched on that. Kirsty, just one quick question for you. Just, it's really interesting to hear about that partnership with Saint-Gobain, and just wondering about, you were sort of saying plans in the future for you when you're looking for construction partners in this process. Oh, I might have lost Kirsty now. Maybe she'll come back. My question was going to be, what does she as a charity look for in terms of construction partners? But I may have lost Kirsty. I think she's gone. Oh, are you back?
I'm still here. Okay, I'm still here. What do we look for in a construction partner? What we're looking for is people who actually see very much the value of what we're doing for the long-term goal for the young people that we're working with. Just as Rich alluded to, it's the qualitative rather than the quantitative for us, because how can we measure the impact on one young person, 10 young people over their lifetime? And that's what we're talking about, setting up a life of change for the young people that the accommodation that we're looking to build is going to create. So we're looking for people who are prepared to think a little bit differently, be prepared to take into consideration the views of the young people, and can help us to maximise what we can do for the money that we have. Obviously every penny counts, and we want to be thinking outside the box a little bit as to how we can, you know, proceed with build projects without it necessarily costing a lot of money.
Okay, great. Well, look, I've probably got time to just go around the panel once, just with the sort of final thoughts, maybe focusing, if you can, on either examples of great social value in action that you've seen, companies that are doing it right, or pointers where if people are looking for new ideas, inspiration, where they can go. So just maybe just to end on some hopeful words, who wants to start off on that? Ben, over to you.
I'll kick off. I just wanted to say that it's been great, this panel, because there's been quite a lot of consistency between all of us as speakers. And the one thing that I think we've all touched on is creating a dialogue with people whose lives are changing. I said that, and I think Joe talked about it, Kirsty and Richard, about if we want to create meaningful change, it means listening, it means talking to, understanding what the needs are, how things are changing over time. I particularly like Joe's comment on the life cycle. At the beginning, maybe it is the responsibility on the clients, the local authorities, to understand what the needs are. So they need to engage with the communities deeply to understand how social value can be created. And then that responsibility for engagement and dialogue will maybe shift to the developer or the contractors, people on site, to go, well, if we are trying to create change, how do we ensure that that is meaningful and is good? And that means talking. It sounds really simple, but it's like, if we don't have that dialogue and we don't have that ability to hear things, and perhaps it's things that we don't necessarily want to hear, then we're not going to create social value. Because, not to put doom and gloom on it, but a lot of things we do aren't creating social value. So we need to ensure that we have that dialogue with community, with people, to understand whether what we're doing is good and how we can do more. So for me, the big takeaway is create that mechanism of dialogue between the people that experience the impact and those creating the activities.
Great. Joe, you're nodding.
Yeah, very happy to go next. I think for me, couple of the big clients that really stood out as sort of really leading this area are Scape, so big government infrastructure frameworks. Their work with Balfour Beatty is really impressive and definitely worth a look at. In the infrastructure side of things, Anglian Water have done tremendous things in Wisbech, which is their operating area, to really tackle that really deprived area. And you think, well, actually, you know, they're a water company. What's their role in doing this? But they do a huge amount of maintenance and sort of construction activity in the area. I mean, they're going way beyond their role as a water company to really regenerate that area in partnership with lots of different organisations. And their approach to outcomes-based contracting with the At One Alliance partnership is also definitely worth a look. And I think finally, I'll just mention, I thought the EDF Energy's work down in Somerset on Hinkley Point C and the work that they're doing to boost the local economy and skills is also is really impressive. And they've formed some partnerships with Bath University to capture the learning and help the rest of the industry kind of learn from what they're doing and help them progress. So yeah, there's plenty more examples actually in the publication, so do take a look.
Great. Okay, and Kirsty, I mean, we can see that your gap homes are a great example of collaboration. Are there any kind of construction organisations that have impressed you, or any inspiration for our listeners?
So I think the other thing to mention about Saint-Gobain have obviously been our main partner through what we've done so far. In addition to supporting both in terms of the fundraising and the construction side of things, they've also made a significant impact on a service that we set up in London called the Building Hope Academy. And this is an academy for young people who are vulnerable, not just care leavers. And that academy is training young people in construction skills to help build that pipeline of talent back into the construction industry, so they can see real value in supporting us in that work to train the next generation of people to work in construction. So that for me, I think is a great way of closing the loop on everything that we're doing with them, because you know, we're training young people to then become part of the industry and move on to the next project. So I think that's really productive.
Great. Okay, so last word over to Richard.
So if I was thinking of any other developers, for example, that it might be worth looking to for inspiration as well, probably one that it would be reasonable to name is Igloo, because they, you know, to their credit, probably 20 years before a number of at least some other developers were thinking about some of these issues as well. So you could say they've been a bit of a pioneer in this area, and they might be worth having a look into. I mean, what's inspiring for me is to hear this, but also in terms of just in our own work day to day, actually looking at all the different sorts of models that are developing in this area. So whether it's any of the disciplines, you know, professionals we've talked about today, or other things like workspace operators and, you know, co-working, things like that, we've come across some really quite interesting models coming forward that I think are rather interesting and really are moving the agenda forward. So you know, maybe it's a subject of future conversation. So my final point would be just to, you know, challenge everyone who's remained and listened and joined into today's conversation to just look to their own organisations really and say, you know, is there, you know, what, challenge ourselves really hard. What can we do to going right back to probably Ben's one of his earlier points about this kind of movement, you could say, towards you know, the social and the environmental outcomes as well, to just, you know, moving the whole industry towards that area. And it only ever is really going to happen, and we're only really going to affect change if everyone from this conversation, for example, goes away and says, actually, what can we do, and how can we move this forward? And then there are lots of places to reach out to for support and guidance, like some on the call today, to help, you know, for those who want some further inspiration.
Good point. Okay, well, look, from there, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm sorry to listeners, I haven't been able to get through all of the questions. There were so many and they were really good. But I think the attendance on this webinar suggests that we should do another one. It's a huge topic. And as Richard said, there's, you know, there's loads of spin-offs from this, so hopefully we can do more on this topic in future. If you missed any of the links that Kirsty and Joe put up, you can get this webinar on demand. It will be available later on the building website, and probably if you've registered through a link that you'll get a reminder for. So it takes a little while for this to process, but this will be available on demand, so you will be able to see the slides, the presentations, and the links again on demand. So for now, all I'm going to say is thank you to everyone attending, to Richard, Ben, Joe and Kirsty for talking to us, and hopefully we can pick up this topic again very soon. So thanks everyone, and goodbye.